From understanding the complexities of our changing climate to shaping ethical frameworks for global challenges, science plays a pivotal role in guiding policy for a better future. Here in Washington, D.C., the American Geophysical Union is gathering scientists, policymakers, and thought leaders to explore the intersection of research and action. This is AGU 24, and you're watching AGU TV. Welcome back to AGU 24. I'm your host, Rachel Phillips, and today we're diving into the critical role policy plays in advancing solutions in Earth and space sciences. Through expert interviews and key highlights from this year's sessions, we'll explore how AGU is connecting science with actionable change. From climate intervention frameworks to the ethics of emerging technologies, AGU 24 is showcasing how collaboration between researchers and policymakers is shaping our future. And here at AGU TV, we're finding out what's next for policy. Today, we focus on policy and everything you need to know for the coming year. Scientific policy plays a critical role in the partnerships that are turning scientific discovery into transformative action. We'll speak with Dr. John Daugherty, Science and Policy Analyst at the Environmental Law Institute, about how geosciences are shaping decisions in climate and environmental policies.
So I think there's this misconception that science ends at the publication, and that's just not true, right? That's where science starts.
Richard Alley from Pennsylvania State University will discuss the evolution of the relationship between science and policy.
People are getting information from so many places that we cannot do our job unless we have such a range of voices that we can reach everyone.
And later we'll talk to you and find out what the biggest myths in your field are and how we can debunk them. All that and more on this episode of AGU TV. To make sure you stay up to date with the latest content, here's where you can find us throughout the conference. You can catch the latest episode of AGU TV at the Walter E. Washington Convention Center, in your hotel room at the Marriott Marquis DC on Channel 42, on the AGU 24 meeting website, on the AGU 24 mobile app, and of course on all our social media platforms. And while you're there, make sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of our geophysical content. I am joined by Dr. Devon Gorbey, who got her PhD in geological sciences at the University of Buffalo and is an emerging voice in science policy. With expertise spanning earth sciences and policy advocacy, Dr. Gorbey shares insights on how the geosciences can shape policy debates and foster diversity to address global challenges like climate change. Thank you, Dr. Gorbey, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So first off, with your expertise as you move more into science policy from a very academic scientific research background, where do you think, or how do you think science can have a seat at the table when it comes to policy decisions?
I think there's really a lack of scientific expertise at the policy making table. And so it's super important for scientists to plug in and kind of translate some of that scientific information into something that makes sense for broader society. But I also think it's really important for policy debates to remain about policy and not about science. It's important for that science to be kind of worked on separately and presented to policymakers in a clear package. And so engaging in things like the IPCC are hugely important processes for shaping international climate policy.
Yeah, I think it's so important what you said about the fine line between involving science with policy and combining them, because I get a lot, or I see a lot of people when I talk about climate change, when I'm trying to communicate science, a lot of people are like, oh, she's getting political. Mm-hmm. But climate change is not a political thing, it's science.
It's science, but it's also kind of inherently political.
Exactly.
Because it has such deep ties.
Political implications.
Exactly.
But like it's backed by science. So I feel like that is it's a misconception people have when they just hear, oh, it's political, it's climate.
Absolutely.
But yeah. So speaking of moving forward with science policy, specifically around climate, we're living in uncertain times with the new administration taking office. So what concerns you about moving forward with that, and where are you looking for possible areas of, common ground collaboration with that?
Yeah, I think I remain very concerned about the Supreme Court's decision to overturn the Chevron doctrine, which is the policy that gave executive branch agencies the latitude to interpret statutes of legislation, even if it wasn't particularly clearly laid out in that legislation. I think that overturning the Chevron doctrine is going to put a lot of environmental rules in particular in courts, and it's going to give the judicial branch power to kind of legislate from the bench, as some people would say. And I think it's still an open question about how Congress is going to respond to that. And so it's, again, really important to kind of put scientists in policymaking positions to kind of filter through some of this information and draft the best possible legislation that reduces the risk of court challenges. But I think there's a lot more common ground in Congress to work on climate policy than most people expect. That was maybe my biggest surprise when I worked on the Hill last year. There's several must-pass pieces of legislation every year, including annual appropriations, the Farm Bill, the National Defense Authorization Act, which is kind of being debated right now on the Hill. And there's lots of opportunities in those spaces to kind of develop climate and environmental legislation and get them into those packages that have to move.
Yeah.
I think we need to continue to push really hard for ambitious emissions reduction goals, and that's kind of what I see as our biggest and most actionable path ahead.
Yeah, I think that's that's kind of the big hitting item. That is absolutely the most important thing that we got to be focusing on for climate change and policy. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing all this. It's a really wonderful perspective you have for being a scientist trained in research and going and advocating for science policy. So thank you for your work.
Thanks for having me.
I think growth and climate change are two major water challenges for management today. And those present major challenges for water utilities and just management overall.
Intera is the world leader when it comes to subsurface visualization and groundwater modeling. We've been around for 50 years, and that's really the DNA of the company. And it's really key because one of the things I love about working with groundwater is that you can never see what you're working with. So that's why subsurface visualization is so important, not just to develop understanding of the systems that we're working with, but also to communicate that to stakeholders, to managers who are really making the decisions that drive, resilience and sustainability.
I am joined by Dr. John Daugherty, Science and Policy Analyst at the Environmental Law Institute. With expertise at the intersection of science and policy, Dr. Daugherty is here to discuss how Earth and space sciences can influence global decision-making, drive innovation in AI, and strengthen climate change policies while fostering diversity in the scientific community. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So first off, how can science have a seat at the table when it comes to policy decisions and debates?
So I think there's this misconception that science ends at the publication, and that's just not true, right? That's where science starts. And there has to be a lot of work, and that's the work of science policy, to take that publication, deliver it to decision makers, and also translate the most tangible, pertinent results of the publication to the decision makers that can then choose to act on it. So building out those effective sort of channels to both deliver and communicate the science, I think, is the job that we have as science policy professionals.
And right now, with regards to policy, we're living in uncertain times with the new administration taking office. So What do you see with this that concerns you, and where are some areas where you're looking for possible common ground?
So I think the most important thing is that all governments have access to and rely upon the most reliable scientific information. What I anticipate seeing is a movement from federal activity more to local and state activity, particularly around climate issues. And I think that's both a challenge and an opportunity for those of us who work in science communication and policy to meet that important need of delivering this information to the local and state actors that are going to be taking the lead on these topics.
Yeah, I love that, the way you put that as also an opportunity. I think a lot of people just see the challenges associated with it, but it's also an opportunity for us to really push our, communication of our work and the importance of it. So that's a great point. And now we also are seeing a transition and a shift toward a lot of AI and machine learning in science. So where do you see Earth and space science's place in this fast-changing area?
Yeah, it's a question that you almost universally get as a science communicator now whenever you give a talk, right? Is how is AI going to impact this field? With the massive caveat that I am not an expert in AI or machine learning. I think what I see as an opportunity for that field to impact Earth and space science and climate science is in the area of extreme weather prediction. So to the extent that AI and machine learning can be used to inform how and where extreme weather events might impact different parts of the country and the world, and help with that kind of analysis and adaptation efforts could be an important way, I think, a beneficial use of that technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And while AI is important, people are still very important for science, and science has always been powered by people. So how can we as a global scientific community keep growing and attracting new and diverse professionals to our field?
It's a challenging question. It's a question that not only touches on the scientific field, but also the policy field. We have a real issue with diversity, right? And we need to fix things. There's not one easy answer to do that. In one sense, grad school is not the most lucrative pathway. So if you're interested in attracting folks from low-income backgrounds, the prospect of pursuing grad school and a PhD and postdoc, as it currently stands, is not really an attractive option to people from low-income backgrounds. At the same time, at earlier stages, I think there's really important work to be done on reaching kids from all different backgrounds, and showing them that science is for everybody, right? Science is not just for the older white people.
Yes, that is a very important point. And lastly, how do you think global policy can be strengthened, specifically surrounding climate change?
Yeah, so I think in the US, we have the real challenge, and in the democratic world, policy, what happens in policy is correlated to what the public would like to happen. And I think the challenge around climate and many other science policy issues is just the amount of disinformation and misinformation out there. And so that's sort of I think the challenge of our times as science policy professionals and communicators is to meet that and to address those concerns about misinformation. And that's not an easy thing to do. It's more than just showing results and publications, but showing how scientists come to those results and conclusions of their papers and why we're confident in those results, and really explaining the how rather than telling the what.
Yes, absolutely. Scientists are really good at making publications, but we're not often all that great at communicating them to lay audiences, to the general public, which is really important if we want their trust. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of this insight.
Thanks for having me.
GRATTIS is a nonprofit organization here in the south end of Albany, New York. We are creating an urban environmental education center, a demonstration site of sustainable tools and technologies.
We have known people who work at GRATTIS Center for a long time. U.S. Forest Service provided opportunity for us to bridge this ecosystem-based approach to climate adaptation with academic expertise. That's why we established ITECA.
Our model is to develop and implement a youth climate corps We train them in urban forestry and climate forestry.
This program is where the next generation of planners for the United States comes from. Breakthroughs that we make will be brought out to the communities where they'll make the most impact.
We can be getting trees into the neighborhoods where they're most needed and really trying to build support at that very local level. Because without that, without neighborhood buy-in, it's not going to be a successful project.
Conversations spark ideas, and ideas drive discovery. AGU's Brain Date Lounge at AGU 24 is exactly where that discovery happens. It's a space designed for meaningful conversations, collaborative learning, and building connections that could lead to the next big breakthrough in Earth and space science. Whether you're sharing insights or gaining new perspectives, the Brain Date Lounge is where connections and discoveries come to life. Let's go see if I can find a brain date. I'm here to meet Kate Larson for a brain date.
Kate, this is a brain
Hi.
date.
It's nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. I'm Rachel. I'm Kate. So I saw you were interested in science communication as well.
Yes, I do social media science communication.
Oh, that's so awesome. Yeah, it's something I'm really passionate about. So what got you into that?
Just a desire to teach other people. Like, I love to learn and also just like blab about the things that I learned. I really enjoy it.
Yeah. I've kind of been in the world of academia for a while now, and I really saw a lack of scientists communicating their work to the public, and so it's something that I really strive to do. I'm glad to see there's other people, working on that as well. I feel like there's a shift now to people taking this more seriously.
Yeah, because it wasn't really a thing during COVID. Like, everyone kind of looked at it like it wasn't a big deal. You're wasting your time. This isn't a real job.
But now they're seeing positive impacts that communication online can have.
Yeah.
And I think that's the real transition that we're seeing, and I'm glad that we're moving that way.
Me too. It's so cool to talk about this with somebody.
Yeah, this has been great.
SEPs are solar energetic particles. So these are particles that are accelerated close to the speed of light during eruptions on the sun. An eruption can send particles throughout a large amount of the inner heliosphere and to Earth, and that can be potentially hazardous to astronauts, particularly when they're outside of the vehicle, like in a spacewalk or doing a lunar EVA exploring the lunar surface.
In Clear Center, we aim to build a space radiation prediction tool that can help us to predict the arrival of particles up to 24 hours ahead of time. With that, we are able to provide the future support for the future human activities in the space.
That would hold a lot of value because we can start to plan ahead for changes in the space radiation environment rather than reacting to changes in the space radiation environment, which is what we do now.
I am joined by Dr. Richard Alley, Evan Pugh University Professor of Geosciences at Penn State, and one of the world's foremost experts on ice sheets and climate change. With decades of research experience, including advising U.S. and international policymakers, Dr. Alley is here to discuss how science can shape inclusive, evidence-based policies and foster stronger collaboration between governments and scientific communities to address global challenges. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Alley.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Rachel. Thank you for what you're doing here.
Of course. So first things first, I want to get your opinion on looking through the past and the evolution of science and policy, what do you think are the key lessons that we've learned from the past successes and the challenges in trying to bridge science and policy?
So science works. We have these fantastic success stories. You know as well as anyone, 1900, a hurricane comes roaring ashore in Galveston with very little warning, and something like 9,000 people are killed. Today we have far more people in the firing line. The warmer ocean is making the storm stronger, and far fewer people are being killed in the storm coming through. And why? Because science works, and it's wedded to policy, that we really have good forecasts, and we have the structure that can get them to people, that can allow the authorities to make warnings and get people out of harm's way. It works.
So I'm curious now, looking to the future, where do you see the evolution of the relationship between science and policy over the next decade? Where do you see it going?
I hope it just gets better and better. I think we have a task, which is that what we've just been saying here has been obvious to us, that the forecasts really do save lives. But I'm not sure that for all of these issues that we have documented that in a way that is readily accessible to the policymakers and the general public. So I think we have a task to do the science and to get the word out on the reality that the value of information from our science is way more than the cost.
So in what way do you think policymakers and scientists, I guess, can build more collaborative relationships between the scientific community and governments?
Yeah, this is hard. If you're a policymaker, you have the world yelling at you. And if you're a public-facing policymaker, you also have the world waving a lot of money and yelling at you. And so it is meeting, it is making relationships, it is moving forward together. And I think a lot of that, AGU, National Academies, let's get more of our members the ability to talk to the policymakers off the record. Let's just sit down and have a talk. And anyone wants to call, you call up AGU, you call up the National Academies, you call up AAAS. They'll get somebody who's from your district, who knows your topic, who'll get in there and have a chat with you.
Yeah, that's a big part of communicating science and communicating accurate science. It's so easy for the public to gain mistrust when we change our answers about things. So it's good for us to be prepared when it comes to that. And I think building relationships is a great point you made. And speaking of building relationships and building inclusivity in science, where do you think, or how do you think building relationships between science and policy helps to address building more inclusive science? And how do you think we can create more inclusive policies around science?
So I believe, I really do, that science is moving towards inclusivity, that the truth is the truth, and the learning is the learning, and that's not people that look like me, and it's not people that look like you, it's people that look like all of us, and they come from all over. So I really believe this. I really believe that the good science we do helps everyone, and it often helps those who have had the hardest time the most. I also think in the modern world, people are getting information from so many places that we cannot do our job unless we have such a range of voices that we can reach everyone at their first stop, not their last one. And I can't expect a whole lot of people to go find me to get their information. We have to have communicators, scientists who look like the whole population. And we are failures if we don't.
I think that's a wonderful message, especially key message to end on. So thank you so much for coming and sharing all this.
Well, thank you for what you're doing.
The Joint Task Force for Smart Cables was initiated in 2010, and then in 2012 we were established by 3 UN organizations: the International Telecommunications Union, World Meteorological Organization, and the UNESCO Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission. The goal of smart cables is to get sensors into the commercial telecom cables that span the ocean and provide our society with connectivity. There are 2 smart cable projects now underway. They both will be installed in 2026. The first one is off Portugal, connecting Lisbon, Azores, Madeira in a 4,000 kilometer ring with 20 sensor modules. And then the second one is called Tam Tam between Vanuatu and New Caledonia. That's much more modest, 400 kilometers and 4 smart modules.
I am joined by Denise Hills, a geologist and project manager at Advanced Resources International, bringing over 17 years of experience in geologic energy research, science communication, and environmental policy. With her extensive expertise in community engagement and energy justice, she is here to share insights on how Earth and space science can shape global policy and the future of innovation. Denise, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
How can science have a seat at the table when it comes to policy decisions and discussion?
My experience has really been people crave the information that scientists can give them, as long as it's presented to them in a way that is accessible to them. So few policymakers, legislators have a science background that they need that expertise from elsewhere, from scientists. And so scientists who can be willing to speak up should, and they should call up the relevant people who need the information that they have.
AI and machine learning seem to walk hand in hand with science whenever the topic comes up. So where do you see Earth and space science's place in this fast changing area?
Wow, what a great question. AI machine learning, there's so many good things that can be done with that. We can reduce time to actionable science using tools such as AI machine learning. One of the things we have to be aware of, though, is that we can build in our own biases into AI tools and machine learning. People can, the general public can also mistrust, black box things like AI and ML. So being able to explain what AI can do, what machine learning can do, and what it can't do, I think is going to be really, really important. And to be willing to learn and adapt how these tools are used. It's just like any other tool that we use in science and technology.
So you mentioned the general public, and given your expertise and your involvement in science communication and public engagement, where do you see the public's role in trying to engage with them and grow and recruit people to our field?
What a great question, because we are all part of the general public too. So that's one thing I think scientists often forget. We are also general public. So it's not an us versus them thing. We do need to engage with people who are not active in science and help bring them along. They don't need to become scientists. They don't need to become science experts. What they need is they need to be able to understand that science is important. The work we do is important. And the ways we do that are to build those connections, to build that trust, to find those common grounds, to find those common interests, and help people understand that the work we do is actually relevant to what they do every day, and that it's important, and that it's important to be supported. That it is not an elitist thing, it is not something that doesn't affect them, that it does affect their day-to-day. It affects their prices of goods. Particularly Earth and space science, it's like natural resources, that's in everyday things,
Yeah, I often find that too. People don't realize, they're like, well, how is geology at all relevant to me? And I'm like, what are you holding right now?
What are you holding right now? Where is your house built? Do you have a flood risk at your house? Is your house going to be impacted by hurricanes? All these different things, geoscience has a role in it. And I think as scientists, if we help humanize ourselves and say, the work I do maybe doesn't seem like it directly affects you, but it helps influence every part of your day-to-day life.
How can global policy be strengthened and grown, specifically regarding energy science?
Wow. How can it be strengthened? I think continuing to train scientists who have a skill set to do science communication with a broader audience. Programs like AGU's Voices for Science is an amazing resource because that program helped train me how to better interact with policymakers and be able to communicate in ways that they need. So not only training more people, but providing support to the people who are good at that. Not every scientist, not every engineer should necessarily be doing open science communication. They should, sometimes the communication they need to be doing is with their peers rather than with other types of decision makers. So supporting the people who do that work, ensuring that your company or your institution understands the value of that type of work. That kind of soft skills is often not as valued when they look at tenure and promotion or raises or bonuses and things like that. But that's actually what tends to move science forward even more.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this insight.
Well, thank you for having me.
The compact coronagraph that was developed at the US Naval Research Laboratory is a small telescope that creates an artificial eclipse of the sun. And by doing so, we can observe the solar corona. A coronal mass ejection is a bubble of plasma that has an embedded magnetic field. That bubble of plasma can be suddenly released from just above the surface of the sun to the outer space.
These events, these coronal mass ejections, can have a real impact here on Earth and our technological infrastructure. We see our reliance on space weather forecasting increasing. We are planning for, as human beings, exploring out into space, in not beyond the protective shell of our magnetic field here at Earth, beyond the moon and out into the solar system. So we know we're going to need better and better space weather forecasting.
I'm joined by Clara Botto, a passionate advocate for ethical climate intervention and a member of AGU's Early Career Advisory Board. With her dedication to science communication and youth engagement, Clara is helping shape policies that prioritize innovation, inclusion, and impactful solutions for our planet. Thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure.
First, how can science have a seat at the table when it comes to policy, debates, and decisions?
I think that in a both indirect and direct way, scientists have always had a seat at the table because whether policymakers like it or not, all the drafts and memos that get to their tables have been informed by scientists before, or all the hard facts that are there on their briefs were also informed by scientists before. So I think, first of all, indirectly, scientists have always played a huge role. But I think now with the climate crisis more than ever, they have not only a role, but also responsibility to be part of decision making as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And right now, there's a lot of uncertainty moving forward with the next administration to take office. So what concerns you about this, and where are you looking for areas of possible common ground?
It concerns me that actually scientists won't be so respected anymore. We know there's been a huge wave of denial when it comes to the climate crisis, when the science is clear, actually, that we are in a crisis that's not only affecting the climate, but people and animals and lives all around the world. So that's a huge concern that I have, that all of this concrete evidence that we have accumulated for the past decades will just be dismissed when making decisions.
Yeah, yeah. And are there ways that you're trying to find ways around this or common ground with moving forward in this next, wave of administration?
I think international/global governance plays a huge role in this, because whether the new administration like it or not, they're still part of a global governance system where there are rules to follow and procedures to follow. I know they're not binding agreements, but there's still a framework, and there is a common set of best practices to be followed.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of science of the future, AI and machine learning seem to be of great discussion recently. So where do you see Earth and space science in this fast-moving area of study?
I think we still don't know what are all the potentials that AI and machine learning have. I guess science is a fast evolving field, and right now we might not know how this field will be looking like in the next, say, 5 years. But I think we need more research into understanding how those technologies can be more energy efficient, because I do understand it's very easy and convenient to just rely on AI for practices that we've been doing manually before, but we shouldn't forget that they're very energy demanding, and yeah, we have to be careful about that.
So science has always been powered by people, and given your involvement in science communication and policy, why do you think it's so important that we involve youth in the discussions surrounding climate intervention and ways forward with climate change?
I think in a very cliche way, young people are the future decision makers. I say cliche just because a lot of people have been saying that, but it's true. People who are learning about challenging topics like climate intervention today, they will be making decisions in the near future, actually. So the sooner they start understanding what these technologies are and what are all the ethical and scientific challenges around them, the better, because then they'll be more informed in the years to come.
Well, Clara, thank you so much for sharing this insight.
Thank you, Rachel.
We are in a climate crisis, and we need to immediately and promptly remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. Peatlands are the densest store of carbon in many landscapes, and they are a carbon sequestering powerhouse, and they're able to sequester carbon at a rate far higher than many other ecosystems, leading them to be a nature-based solution to our climate crisis.
In the city of Greater Sudbury, there are 81,000 hectares which have been highly damaged by sulfur dioxide and metal pollution. And these areas needed restoration, and there have been active restoration programs to try and do this.
In the fight against climate change, we need to be developing new and novel techniques to take carbon out of the atmosphere. We see these degraded peatlands as important nature-based solutions in our fight against climate change.
Myths and misconceptions can often cloud incredible work being done in the geosciences. We spoke to AGU attendees to uncover the biggest myths in their field and explore how science can set the record straight. Let's hear their insights on debunking these misconceptions and bringing clarity to their groundbreaking research.
The biggest misconception in my field that I come across a lot is that the mantle isn't like a completely solid rock. Yeah, it moves plastically, but even cooler, people think that it might be red because of the diagrams, but it's actually probably closer to green because of all the olivine and peridotite.
So I work in volcanology, and the one thing that really drives me crazy
is when newspapers or any sort of media journalists, at least the badly trained ones, say that volcanoes make smoke. So as we know as volcanologists, we don't get smoke from volcanoes unless they're actually burning something. It's usually just gas and ashes being blown into the sky, so it's not smoke.
I believe one of the biggest ones is people assuming that geology isn't a real science, whereas I believe that geology in fact integrates all sciences so well that you can't say that it's not real. In fact, it's one of the most pure ones, bringing in all of them together: physics, chemistry, maths, everything. So I believe that's one of the biggest misconceptions we have.
Yeah, the biggest misconception to me when I was starting out in carbon in forests was understanding that different types of ecosystems store carbon really differently, and thinking about above and below ground carbon storages as both being really important and trying to understand which ecosystems do that the best has been really new to me, and I've been excited to learn about that here.
The biggest misconceptions in my field is that air quality doesn't lead to climate change.
GRATTIS, or the Gravitational Reference Advanced Technology Test in Space, is a mission funded by NASA to test advanced sensors for tracking water and ice over the surface of the Earth.
We're excited by the potential that GRATTIS offers, not only in terms of the improved sensitivity from the accelerometers, which will result in better science measurements, but also by the fact that it allows for a small satellite configuration, which would be more cost-effective.
Right now, we are full steam ahead for building technology demonstration of our new sensor for future GRACE missions. So we've spent many years now developing hardware in the lab, computer models, and we want to go and put that all together into a spacecraft and test that technology so we can demonstrate 100% that it's ready for future GRACE missions.
And these sensors are more precise than such sensors that have flown in the past. So if we're successful, then this could lead to a future Earth science missions with higher precision, with a greater ability to track Earth's water and ice.
That's it for this episode of AGU TV. If you missed anything or want to revisit today's content, there are plenty of ways to do so. You can catch the latest episode of AGU TV at the Walter E. Washington Convention Center, in your hotel room at the Marriott Marquis DC on Channel 42, on the AGU 24 meeting website, on the AGU 24 mobile app, and of course on all our social media platforms. And while you're there, make sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of our geophysical content. Today, we explore the intersection of policy and science. But tomorrow, we'll shift gears to highlight how a focus on inclusion is shaping the future of Earth and space science. Join us as we dive into the next frontier of AGU. See you then.